Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I got transferred to this small town a few years ago, and right away my sergeant handed me a file that was thicker than a phone book. The name on it was one I'd be getting to know real well. Let's call him my special project. See, about 5 years before I showed up, this kid and his buddies pulled off what became the most talked about prank in town history. I can't get into specifics because it would give away exactly where this happened, but let's just say it involved the town's main landmark and cost the taxpayers a fortune to fix. Made it all the way to national news as one of those and finally stories they stick at the end of broadcasts. All the kids got caught pretty quick. Small towns don't have many secrets. They were juveniles, so they got probation and had to pay back what they broke. Most of them learned their lesson, paid up, finished their probation, and moved on. Their records would get wiped clean in a couple years, and they could pretend it never happened. But not my guy. This kid came from what you'd generously call a troubled family. They lived in beaten-up trailers on some rural property that somebody let them use out of pity. The parents had given their kids names that made them sound like characters from a bad Western movie. Think outlaw names, but somehow tackier. My guy seemed determined to live up to every stereotype about his family. When I arrived at the station, the boss explained how things worked. Each officer got assigned a list of repeat offenders to keep track of. If your guy got arrested again, that was your paperwork to deal with. Lucky me, I got the kid who hadn't paid a single dollar of his restitution in 4 years. I met with his probation officer first thing. She was frustrated beyond belief. She told me the kid hadn't paid anything back to the town, not one penny. He'd also missed half his community service hours and skipped probation meetings. She wanted to charge him with breaching his probation. I asked what his excuse was, and she explained he claimed he couldn't find work, but they knew he'd had at least 3 jobs that year. He just didn't show up half the time or came in high. We filed the breach charges and waited. In rural areas like ours, the judge only comes around once a month, and it's usually the same guy seeing the same troublemakers over and over. Turned out this judge remembered my guy real well. He was the one who'd given him probation in the first place. The kid showed up to court in his usual act, hung his head, promised he'd get his life together, begged for mercy. It had worked before, but this time the judge had heard enough. The judge told him the town needed that restitution money, and they'd had to put off repairs because of what he and his friends did. The prosecutor laid out everything, how the kid had made money at various jobs but spent it on everything except what he owed the town, how he'd violated his probation repeatedly. The judge sentenced him to a conditional sentence order, 18 months. The kid's face went white. A conditional sentence order is like super probation. You're technically in jail, but you serve it at home with strict rules. Curfew, house arrest, the whole deal. The catch is that if you break any rule, you go to real jail. But here's the important part that the kid didn't understand, and that would come back to bite him later. With regular probation, the clock keeps ticking even if you mess up. Not with a CSO. If you breach it and we file charges, everything stops until you deal with those charges. The kid was terrible at following rules. We gave him warnings about breaking curfew. His probation officer tried to work with him. Then he asked permission to go somewhere and was told no. He went anyway. When we found out, we went to his house to talk to him about it. Soon as he saw our car pull up, he took off running and didn't come back. My partner asked if we should put out a warrant, and I told him I'd already filed the breach charges and now we had to wait. Over the next few weeks, our informants kept us updated on where he was hiding. First, he crashed on friends' couches until he wore out his welcome. Then he was living in an abandoned car behind someone's house. The homeowner hated him being there, so he had to sneak around and spend his days wandering town looking for handouts. I started seeing him around but pretended not to notice. I'd drive by his family's place regularly, making sure his parents saw me. I'd visit his friends' houses, being real obvious about checking the property where that abandoned car sat. Never found him there, but word got back that he spent several cold nights sleeping in the woods after my visits. I had a rookie officer riding with me during this time. One afternoon, we spotted him walking down Main Street and he bolted. The rookie asked if we should chase him and started running after him, but I called her back. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind and wanted to know why we didn't catch him when we could have done it easily. I explained that I didn't want to catch him. Not yet. I told her to think about it. Right now, he was living like a hunted animal, sleeping in cars and bushes, never knowing when we'd show up. His friends were getting tired of him, and his family wouldn't let him come home because we kept hassling them. The rookie pointed out that we had a warrant, but I explained the difference between regular probation and CSOs. I told her that with regular probation, even if you run, the sentence keeps counting down. You disappear for 6 months, you still only owe whatever time was left when you vanished. But with a CSO, once we file that breach, the clock stops. He could hide for 2 years and still owe the full 18 months when we caught him. She was starting to get it. I explained further that if I'd arrested him 3 months ago, he'd have done maybe a week in jail, with a warm bed and 3 meals a day, then been back out with a slap on the wrist. This way, he was learning what it really meant to be on the run. And every kid in town was watching what happened when you didn't follow the rules. The weather started getting colder in October. November was brutal. Our informants told us he was getting desperate, begging people to let him crash for just one night. His parents were getting pressure from neighbors who were tired of cops showing up at their place. Finally, in late November, he walked into the station and turned himself in. He looked like he'd aged 5 years and 6 months. Skinny, dirty, exhausted. I asked if it had been a rough couple of months, and he just told me to book him because he couldn't do it anymore. He ended up serving 4 months in jail. Could have been a week if he'd faced the music right away, but he chose the hard way. While he was hiding out, all his buddies saw exactly what running from the law looked like. Word spread fast in a small town. For the next few years, whenever I dealt with young troublemakers, I'd tell them about the kid who thought he was smarter than the system. When parents asked what would happen if their kids didn't follow probation, I'd tell them about this kid from a few years back who thought he could outsmart us. By the time I finished the story, those kids usually decided that showing up for community service wasn't so bad after all. I needed some expensive tools for a home renovation project, and with Black Friday coming up, I figured I'd try to stack as many discounts as possible. My local drugstore was running a promotion where they sold gift cards for a major hardware chain at 10% off face value. You could pay with credit card and still get cash back, plus earn reward points at the hardware store. It seemed like a no-brainer. I had been saving up for months to upgrade my workshop. The old table saw was on its last legs, and I needed a new drill press and some quality hand tools. The total came to around $1,500, so I decided to buy that amount in gift cards to maximize my savings. When I walked into the drugstore, I went straight to customer service and asked for $1,500 worth of hardware store gift cards. The cashier looked a bit surprised but called over the assistant manager right away. The assistant manager was a middle-aged guy with tired eyes who seemed friendly enough at first. He appeared almost instantly, which I thought was good customer service. He asked to see my ID and checked it thoroughly against my credit card. He told me he needed to verify everything matched up because they had to be careful with large gift card purchases these days. I said that was no problem and that I understood. He handed my ID back and leaned against the counter casually. He started telling me about how they get a lot of people trying to buy gift cards because of scams and asked if I had heard about those. I said yeah, I had heard about some of them, but I was just buying these for myself to get the discount. The assistant manager nodded and explained how scammers call people pretending to be from the tax agency. He said they tell people they owe money and have to pay with gift cards or they'll be arrested. He mentioned it was a pretty obvious scam if you asked him. I nodded politely, wondering why he was telling me this when I clearly wasn't being scammed. I was standing there with my own credit card and ID, buying hardware store gift cards to save money on tools I actually needed. I agreed that it did sound obvious and said good thing I was just using these for some tools I needed to buy. The assistant manager's expression changed slightly. He got this weird look in his eyes, like he was remembering something unpleasant. He started telling me about how last year they had a customer come in asking for $2,500 in iTunes gift cards. He said he could tell right away it was a scam, so he tried to explain how these things work. I told him that was nice of him to try to help. He said, yeah, well, she wasn't having any of it. He explained that this woman became absolutely angry and started swearing at them, threatening them, calling them idiots for not just doing their jobs and selling her the cards. I started to feel uncomfortable. There was something in his tone that suggested this story was going somewhere I didn't like. The assistant manager continued, saying she was screaming about how they had no right to question her purchase, how she knew what she was doing, how they were just minimum wage workers who should mind their own business. I said that sounded awful, and that I was sorry he had to deal with that. The assistant manager smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. He said, "Oh, it gets better," and asked if I knew what he did after she finished yelling at them and threatening to get them fired. I asked what he did. He told me he sold her the $2,500 worth of iTunes gift cards. Every single one. I stared at him, not sure I understood correctly. I asked if he sold them to her even though he knew it was a scam. He said that when she wanted to be rude and treat them like garbage, he figured she could learn her lesson the hard way. I felt my stomach drop. This guy was bragging about helping someone get scammed out of thousands of dollars because they were rude to him. He continued his story, explaining that 45 minutes later, she was back with the police. He said it turned out she went to another store and bought another $2,500 worth. The scammer told her it still wasn't enough and to hit a third store. That's when it finally clicked for her that maybe this might be a scam. I asked if she got her money back. The assistant manager explained that the cops called Apple and they'd already used $3,500 of the gift cards, but they managed to void the remaining $1,500. She got that part refunded eventually, but she was out the rest. I asked him directly if he let someone lose $3,500 because they were rude to him. He said, hey, he tried to warn her and she didn't want to listen. Sometimes people need to learn things the hard way. I told him that wasn't teaching someone a lesson but helping criminals steal from them. His friendly demeanor completely disappeared. He asked if I was buying these gift cards or not because he had other customers to help. I looked at him for a long moment. This guy had just confessed to essentially being an accomplice to fraud because his ego got bruised. I thought about how that woman probably went home in tears, realizing she'd lost thousands of dollars that she probably couldn't afford to lose. I told him I thought I'd get my gift cards somewhere else and turned to walk toward the door. He called after me to wait and come back, saying I couldn't just waste his time like this. I kept walking but turned around at the exit. I told him I thought I was going to call his corporate office because they should probably know that their assistant manager was bragging about helping scammers steal from customers. The assistant manager went pale. He said I couldn't do that and that he was just telling a story. I explained it was a story about how he deliberately let someone get robbed because they hurt his feelings. And I was sure corporate would find it very interesting. I walked out and went to the hardware store directly. I didn't get the 10% discount, but I saved myself from giving money to a business that employs people who think revenge is more important than protecting customers from criminals. 2 weeks later, I drove past the drugstore and noticed they had a now hiring assistant manager sign in the window. My dad was out of town that weekend and my mom needed a ride back from my grandparents' place. It's about 100 kilometers away, and while my mom has her license, she doesn't like driving long distances. My car isn't the most reliable for highway trips, so I plan to use my dad's car instead. Since my girlfriend and I lived together and she had some shopping to do, I figured she could use my car while I was gone. Sunday morning came and we drove to my parents' house so I could pick up my dad's car. Simple enough, I'd take his car to get my mom, and my girlfriend would head out in mine. What could go wrong? I hadn't even made it to the city limits when my phone rang. My girlfriend's voice was shaky, telling me she'd been in an accident. The crash site was at the end of our street, so I turned around right away. When I got there, I had to fight back laughter at what I saw. My girlfriend had made a right turn at the end of our street and managed to hit not one, but two parked cars. The skill required to hit two stationary vehicles in broad daylight was almost impressive. I walked over to check the damage and started talking with the car owners. Both vehicles had some decent dents and scratches, but nothing too severe. Since my girlfriend was clearly at fault, I told them I would pay for all repairs. I suggested we handle this through what we call an amicable form, basically a simplified accident report that both parties can fill out without involving police. It saves everyone time, especially since our city sees dozens of minor accidents daily. The problem was that it was Sunday, and all the insurance offices were closed. I couldn't get the forms until Monday. I explained this to the two car owners, took photos of my insurance documents, exchanged phone numbers, and told them we were neighbors. I promised to return Monday morning with the proper forms so we could get everything settled quickly. Both guys seemed reasonable about the arrangement, so I headed off to pick up my mom. During the drive, I called a friend who works in insurance. He emailed me the forms and gave me contact information for a repair shop that could have both cars fixed within a day. I called the car owners back to let them know we could get everything sorted out that same day when I returned. That's when everything changed. One of the guys suddenly got an attitude. He told me that, in his position, he was entitled to go to the police instead, and that's where he'd be waiting if we wanted to resolve this. The way he emphasized being entitled really got under my skin. Here I was, trying to be decent about an accident my girlfriend caused, offering to pay for everything and get their cars fixed right away, and this guy wanted to waste an entire Sunday at the police station because he felt entitled to make our lives difficult. Fine. If he wanted to play that game, I was more than ready. I should mention that I have a master's degree in law and have been working at law firms for over 5 years. I know these regulations better than most of the cops who enforce them. When I called the guys back on my way home with my mom, I asked them to grab an accident report form for me as well. They told me they couldn't because there was only one form per person. This was complete nonsense. I know for a fact that when you request these forms, the officers typically ask if the other party is present so they can provide forms for everyone involved. By the time I arrived at the police station, they'd already been waiting for 2 to 3 hours. I got my number, 89, while they had numbers 56 and 57. Each case takes about 20 to 30 minutes to process, so we were in for a long wait. When their numbers were finally called, I followed them into the office and asked the officer a simple question. I wanted to know if I should be present during the discussion since this was a three-way accident involving my girlfriend's car and their two vehicles. The officer told the two guys to leave and come back once all three parties had completed their reports. They had to wait another 30 minutes for my girlfriend to finish her paperwork. Then we all went in together. What happened next was a masterclass in police incompetence. The officer handling our case was so unprofessional that even someone with no legal background would have been appalled. First, neither of the two men filing reports had any legal right to do so. One didn't even have a driver's license. The car belonged to his mother, and his girlfriend had filled out the report. The other had a license but was filing for his parents' car. According to the law, only the vehicle owner or the person driving at the time of the accident can file these reports. The officer found my girlfriend guilty, which was accurate, and began filling out the paperwork. But then I asked him a crucial question about whether he knew the parking regulations for the street where this accident occurred. He said he didn't know them. I asked if he thought that might be relevant to this case. His response was incoherent rambling that ended with him asking if I really disliked cops. I told him I dislike incompetent individuals in any profession, regardless of their job title. He pushed through with his authority and issued my girlfriend a ticket, then handed the other guys copies of my insurance information for their repairs. What he didn't do was take mandatory photographs of the damaged vehicles, which is required by law for every case that crosses his desk. He literally had no evidence that an accident had ever occurred beyond the word of two guys who weren't even legally authorized to file reports. When I got home, I did exactly what my education and profession had taught me to do. I filed a lawsuit. I submitted the paperwork on Monday and got a court date 4 months out. Litigation moves slowly in our country. Most civil cases take anywhere from 1 to 8 years to resolve, depending on how aggressively your lawyer pushes things. Here's where the real satisfaction kicks in. Those two guys felt entitled to waste my Sunday at the police station instead of accepting my offer to have their cars fixed right away. If they'd taken my original offer, their vehicles would have been repaired by Tuesday. Instead, they're about to learn a very expensive lesson about parking regulations. The street where the accident occurred, like most streets in our area, requires cars to be parked parallel to the sidewalk. Not on the sidewalk, not perpendicular to it, parallel. Because the street serves several apartment buildings with insufficient parking, the neighbors had made an informal convention to park perpendicular to the sidewalk to fit more cars. This blocks an entire traffic lane, but that's a separate issue. The thing about informal conventions is that they work fine until something goes wrong and police get involved. Then the actual law takes precedence, and anyone violating parking regulations becomes responsible for what happens next. There's absolutely no chance we'll lose this lawsuit. In fact, I plan to drag it out as long as possible, probably 4 to 5 years if I really push it. Here's the beautiful part. There's a law stating that any item under litigation doesn't produce legal effects. This means that until a judge renders a verdict, my girlfriend's ticket is suspended. More importantly, those two guys can't get their cars repaired. Not through insurance, not even with their own money. The vehicles are essentially treated as evidence in an ongoing legal proceeding. My main legal argument centers on something called causality link. Applied to our situation, it means that while my girlfriend did cause an accident, that accident was caused by their illegal parking. If they had parked legally, there would have been more room, their cars wouldn't have been in that position, and they wouldn't have been hit, regardless of my girlfriend's actions. Their decision to park perpendicular to the sidewalk was the root cause of the damage to my car. So these two entitled individuals who couldn't accept a simple immediate solution are now facing years of legal proceedings. Not only will they eventually pay for our repairs, but they'll be driving damaged cars for the foreseeable future. All because one guy felt entitled to waste everyone's time at the police station. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.